This is your pre-lab recording for week 10 of our 15-week semester. This is the week of March 21st. Let's start with a couple of announcements. You're going to continue testing your compound this week, and remember to treat all compounds as toxic. The only one that's not toxic is dimethyl sulfoxide, or DMSO, and of course water. DMSO is actually used as a carrier for compounds for transdermal delivery. So be especially careful of compounds that are in DMSO, because generally it will mean that the compounds can be absorbed through your skin. So as usual, wear gloves and treat everything as if it is a chemotherapy. After this week, we have one more week of testing. So the week of March 28th will be the last week when you're setting up vials. And then for the next 2 weeks, you'll be analyzing the data or counting how many of the larvae have closed from pupae. For this week, this is the academic pause week. And as you know, on Thursday, we have a wellness day. So on Wednesday and Thursday, there are no labs. So all labs are canceled on Wednesday, March 24th and Thursday, March 25th. And the lecture on March 24th is recorded. I'll have that posted probably on Tuesday, so you can watch that really at any time. Remember that lab absences, as usual, need to be communicated to either me or to your TA. We just need to know when you're not there, because your absence will impact the other members of your group. So try to keep the lines of communication open, please. This week, you learned about drug development. There were optional assignments, either a perusal or a play pause it assignment that was due on March 21st at 10 p.m. These assignments, I'll be giving feedback on your submissions, but they will not count in your gradebook. Like I said, this is an academic pause week, and the university has asked us not to have any new grades for this week. For next Sunday, March 28th, you will have an assignment due. We'll be talking about clinical trials that week, so you'll have a clinical trials play posit that's due on March 28th, and this is on our usual schedule, so it will be counted in your grade book. This week in lab, you're going to have your stage 2 exam. You'll have 2 parts like last time. The first part will have just one question. You'll be discussing the answer with other members of your section in lab. And every student will be submitting a copy of the printout of that question. But you all have to agree on the same answer. The purpose of this is to get you talking about things that people struggled with on the exam. You may have gotten that question right, and that's okay. Now it's your job to explain it to the other members of your group or of your entire section. Your TA will not be involved in helping you with the answer of this question. Also on the sheet that you get in lab, there's a bit.ly URL for an exam reflection form. This is the same one that you did last time. I'd like you just to think about what you thought you were going to get on the exam, what you actually got on the exam, and the kinds of things that worked or didn't work in terms of studying. This is the progression of your research project. And we are now coming out of the introduction, which you talked about last week in lab. And I wanted to highlight the next section, which is the method section of your poster. You'll be talking about that the week after next. So I've changed the due date. The original due date of the methods draft, which is required of all groups and is graded, will be April 4th. It's the following Sunday, and this has been updated on Canvas. You'll be submitting a draft of your methods after you discuss it with your group and your section, and we'll be editing and giving you feedback, but also grading you based on how you meet the criteria of the rubric that's provided on Canvas. This week in lab, you'll be collecting embryos. We need to keep maintaining those population cages, so we have a population of third instar larvae for you every single day. So some of you will be doing that this week, and I'd like to encourage you to start trying other techniques. If you find that you're getting in the habit of going into lab and doing the same thing every single time, try something new, or teach somebody who hasn't done your technique how to do it. You may also be isolating third instar. I know last week you may have noticed that the yield of embryos was very low. And I think this is because the flies that were in the population cages starting a week ago on Sunday the 14th We killed all of the flies that were in there and replaced them with new flies. So I think typically when you set up a new population cage, the yield tends to be low, I think because they're getting used to each other, they're getting used to the new setting. Also, the flies that are in there are very young. They should be maximally productive, but they're probably not all that good at making embryos yet. So this coming week, I think you'll see that the yield is much higher. All that said, the third instar larvae yield also will be low, because remember, when the embryos develop, it takes them about 5 to 6 days to develop from embryo, from being a fresh embryo to being a third instar larvae. So we're now isolating the third instar larvae from last week. If there aren't enough, don't worry. Go ahead and set up your vials as you have been. And we will, Gretchen and I will irradiate larvae as they become available, even if it's on the wellness day or over the weekend. We're going to be monitoring and collecting plates and doing larvae and everything while you're not in the lab. So just leave your vials in your box, put a piece of tape on the top, please, and clearly mark what needs larvae. Put a piece of tape on the top and in big black marker write, "These vials need larvae, please." And we'll be sure to get the larvae in there as soon as they're available. You will also see in the lab this past weekend, I went over and marked with tape any vials that need to be quantified. So there are a lot of vials both in the control group and some of the experimental groups that you've been setting up that are ready for quantification. After quantification, make sure that for the controls, you're logging it on the Google Sheet that you'll find on Canvas, and your TA also has access to this if you can't find that link. Your own data will be logged in your lab notebook. So don't put your own data in with the control data. After you quantify these vials, you'll be putting them into biohazard. There's no need to save them because nothing's going to change. The data have been collected. It's time for them to go. I also left a note for most of you just with an update of how I think things are going. A lot of the vials are looking so incredibly good. I figured I should leave you a note to let you know that, not to do anything different. And there are also a number of vials that have some issues. The most common issue I saw was not enough larvae. If you don't have enough larvae, you're not going to have the statistical power to determine whether your compound is a hit or not. So I made some recommendations on those cards. Please read them, and if you have questions, just drop me an email or send me a text, and I'll get back to you right away. Most of you this coming week are going to be setting up your second round of dilutions. So this is the exact same experiment that you did last week, where you took your stock, you made 1 to 2 dilutions 3 times so that the concentration is cut in half from your stock to tube 2, cut in half again to tube 3, cut in half again to tube 4, and then you diluted those new stocks, the diluted stocks, into your food. And the volume that you used would be dependent on the volume that you used in your very first experiment in Discovery Lab. So you'll be repeating that this week, and then we're going to be swinging by the lab to talk to you and your TAs about the next steps after this week, to see what it is that you think would be interesting to try in your last week of experiments. Some tips for your experiments. Again, this is based just on what I saw over the weekend. Make sure that you're adding as many larvae as possible. Don't be shy. If there aren't a lot of larvae, just use what's there and make sure the vials that are set up well, meaning with at least 50 larvae in each vial. I know it's really hard to estimate, so if you need to, just overestimate. When you're sorting larvae in the sieves, make sure that you're not sorting them too hard. And what I mean by that is when the food is on the top level of the 3 sieves, you're going to be using your fingers to smush up the food, but don't smush it too much. If you smush it too much, you're going to smush the larvae. And I think there were some vials, not very many, but some vials that had only cornmeal. And what that tells me is that you all isolated larvae, and everybody thought things were going well. And then those larvae were irradiated and they came out and you put them into the vials. But really what happened was the larvae got smushed in the isolation, and what you ended up with was just little pieces of food. So be gentle. I know that people really want to wear gloves, but this is one of those things that you really are only going to be able to do well if you don't have gloves on. So find somebody in the lab who's not afraid of touching the larvae and have them isolate them if you're worried. Be sure to be measuring the food volume carefully. Every vial should have 5 milliliters of food, no more, no less. Because if the food volume is incorrect, the concentration of your drug is going to be incorrect. Also, if you put too little food into the vial, it dries up really easily. So if you just take a peek at other people's boxes, you see where the food is very, very low. It's like a little hockey puck because there just isn't enough to keep the moisture high enough inside of the vial. So remember, in a lab, every volume, every concentration is chosen with intention. 5 milliliters is chosen to be the minimum amount to make sure that the food doesn't dry up. And we don't use more than that because any more than that is just being wasteful. Also, make sure you add the drug while the food is still very warm. And by very warm, I mean liquid. I can see in some cases where the pipette is going into the food and it's just leaving a divot, or it's being dragged through the food and the food looks like a bunch of mountains and canyons. That's going to create an unequal distribution of drug in the food, and the larvae have the potential, once they start eating the food, to get trapped in the food. So make sure that the food is really warm when you're adding the drug so that it's all liquid and you have a flat surface after you put the drug in. This coming week, like I said, you're going to have the clinical trials play posit due. This is an assignment that will count on March 28th at 10 p.m. Your methods section is not optional. It is graded, but it's due the following week. So I delayed this by a week so that you'd have an opportunity to talk about it in your lab sections. The week of the 4th, you're also going to have a bioethics play posit due. And this will be your last play posit, your last weekly quiz of the semester. The week after that is your last exam, and the week after that is when your poster is due. On Friday, make a note that it's Friday, April 16th at 5 p.m. At that time, we'll be taking your poster, your PowerPoint slide, and uploading it to the website that we maintain. You'll also be recording a video presentation of your poster. Every member of the group records a presentation of the poster that's produced as a group. In other words, your group will have one poster, and if you have 4 members of the group, there will be 4 individual presentations of that video. And those videos will be available on the website and will be evaluated by students in other cures, or course-based undergraduate research experiences in MCEB at the Cure Symposium. But we'll talk all about that as it gets a little bit closer. In the meantime, set up that last dilution series this week. And next week, we'll talk about other cool experiments that we can do to wrap your project up. Have a great academic pause.